Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Dane Zorko here from the Brisbane Lions.
Jason Johannesson from the Western Bulldogs.
Luke Parker here from the Sydney Swans.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Max Shaw, Melbourne Football Club.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hello, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. Today we wrap up the teams of the 50 most relevant. You know who it is. You've read it on the description. Collingwood champion Adam Treloar. He's just been getting it done year in, year out. There ain't many reasons to build for why he's not going to in 2020. To talk about this man, I got Jimmy. Hello, buddy.
Hello, MJ. Hello, listeners.
It's
good to be back.
To have you back as well. Let's talk about this 26-year-old superstar. He is well and truly just one of the elite fantasy footballers that we have right across all the formats. Last year was his personal best SuperCoach season. He ended up averaging 113 across that format. Almost identical in terms of his average in DreamTeam and AFL Fantasy. Fun fact for you, Jimmy. 6 points differential in terms of what they scored across all those formats. 6 points. I don't know why I told you that. Yeah, it's not bad. It's got to that point of the 50 most relevant where I find any kind of scoring differential and I get excited by it. Last year, his best score came against Richmond in AFL Fantasy. It was a massive 152, while in SuperCoach, he, like many other premium midfielders last year, towed up the Gold Coast Suns with a 177. In SuperCoach, he's going to set you back just over 615,000, while in Fantasy and Dream Team, he's pricey. He's around about $840K, just under in AFL Fantasy, and just a touch over $820,000 in DT. Jimmy, when we do talk about Adam Treloar, he's just one of the most enjoyable players to own. And just in football in general, he wins plenty of his own ball. He possesses this great burst of speed out of stoppage, can get the ball on the outside and link up when guys like Pendlebury or Sidebottom win it on the inside. Equally, he's just as prolific and proficient at winning the ball on the outside and farming it out to some of their outside runners. He's just a really good footballer.
He's not bad, is he?
He can
He's not a
football.
premiership player yet, but he goes all right.
Here we go, yes. Mate, if it were not for Dom Sheed, he would be, so...
He would, yeah, or contract decisions. Yeah, look, let's digress. He is a quality footballer. If there's a knock on him, it is that, as I think you're about to say there, that he can occasionally butcher the football a little bit.
He has been known for that?
He has, and I think that ultimately is part of what makes the difference between his Dream Team and his SuperCoach scoring, in that, and I say the difference, they're very, very similar numbers by the end of the year, but his big games can be bigger in SuperCoach, but his poor games can be a lot poorer. So when he is having a bit of a mare of a day, and he's missing targets by foot as well, that hurts him a lot more in SuperCoach than it does in Dream Team. And conversely, when he is right on top of it and he kicks his 2 or 3 goals as he does every so often, and gets on the end of 40-odd disposals, then he has those much bigger games in SuperCoach. You said that 170-odd last year as well. So he can be a little bit more up and down in that format perhaps than in Dream Team, where he's almost just a model of consistency.
He certainly is. There are certain factors and statistical lines you want to be ranked highly in. Like he's ranked first in the league last year for total disposals, first in the league for total handballs, 7th, ranked SuperCoach player last year, 3rd for total effective disposals, which is interesting given he's also ranked 9th in the AFL for total clangers. And so there is plenty to like about Adam Treloar. Even with that, he's ranked 4th for uncontested possessions across the league, 12th for clearances. He really is one of the elite midfielders in the competition. And you do talk about his Dream Team and AFL Fantasy numbers. Last year, played every single game for us and is a regular 20-plus games player every single year. Last year was really the only exception. Of his 22 games, 18 were tons. Not bad.
Yeah.
Of those,
percentage.
yeah, not bad. Of those, 10 of them were over 120, and he only dipped below 90 twice last year in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, an average of 113 in terms of what that looks like for ranking against other people. He ended up the year 3rd for total points last year, ranked 2nd for midfielders behind McRae, and currently the 4th highest averaged player. Not a bad season from Adam Treloar.
Very, very solid numbers. And the thing with him too at the minute is that nobody's talking about him, and I can't quite figure out why that is. But then when I go and look at the ownership numbers in DreamTeam at the minute, he's sitting in over 20% of teams. He's just one that people are quietly locking away and not talking much about, and with good reason, I think.
Yeah, he seems to just find a way to just get it done. Very similar sort of ownership in AFL Fantasy, 15%. A little less in SuperCoach, sitting at 7% at the moment, which is quite unique considering last year with that 113 average. He put up 17 tons last year. 7 of them, so not as many big 120s like you talked about. That sometimes that ability to butcher the ball because he's winning it, hard and fast, picking it up quickly, getting it with that forward momentum at times. Because of it, he's not always going to be the most precise user of the ball by foot, but still 7 120 plus scores. Only dipped below 83 once, ranked 5th for total points of all midfielders last year, and 9th for averages. Between rounds 12 and 21 last year, didn't drop below 100 across all of the formats. For 2 of the past 6 years now, he's been able to go over 110 across formats, and for the past 6 seasons, he has not dropped an average under 100. My word, he's good.
He certainly is, and people have named his teammate Dependleberry, and Treloar's really, at this point, I think needs to be considered in that same bracket as he was.
He's building to that, both in terms of a frequency of hundreds and how rarely he gives you a bad score. If you look over his past 3 seasons, which is 56 games, because it was pretty injury impacted in 2018, he's had just 6 scores under 80. That's 10% of his games. While he's had just the 4 scores under 80 in the past 56 games in DreamTeam and Fantasy. 7% of games in the past 3 years, he's hurting you with a sub-80. But then you look at what he's doing in terms of the frequency of hundreds. Not just the ceiling, but frequency. 73% of the games in the past 56 games, he's gone 100 or more. That's 41 tons. Well, it's not much different in SuperCoach too. 67% he goes 100 or more in that format. 38 tons in the past 56 games. He's a better SuperCoacher than what we give him credit for.
He really is, yeah. And again, that ceiling that he can produce in that format when he's up and about is, it's right up there with the best of them.
It is, and I think that's one of the questions marks I have, and it's maybe reflective that with the 7% ownership, that's probably, to be fair, a lot of Collingwood supporters through there, is he is more renowned for his AFL fantasy ability because, like we've talked about, sometimes when he does have those clangers, it's impacting on his SuperCoach score, not his fantasy and DreamTeam score. But last year we saw his potential, 17 tons, 113 average. Yeah. But I think the question we've got to have around him is a 113 average puts you as a top 3, 4, 5 in DreamTeam and Fantasy. In SuperCoach, though, guys like McRae, Dangerfield, Fife, Cripps, Neal, arguably Dunkley, they're all going to be around that marker of 120. And can you choose to start Treloar just for skimping on a little bit of cash if you don't think he can go 120 like these boys?
See, that's the thing with him, but it's as much too about timing with Treloar as well. And that if and I think if we look at him, can we confidently and comfortably say there are going to be 8 midfielders who are going to go better than he will in SuperCoach this year? And I don't think he can. There might be, but there's every chance that he does sit in that 5th to 8th kind of bracket, I think, realistically, for SuperCoach this year. He might be a little under, but he'll be there or thereabouts. And so if you like him, and if you think that he's got potential to have a couple of those monster games this year, and if you think he's a handy option as a vice captaincy because of the amount of Friday night games that Collingwood get, then, why not? The main reason I think you're not giving him the vice captaincy is because you've got Grundy as well. But in any case, he's a valid and worthy option to choose if you like the way he goes about, and he looks nice sitting in your team there. Yeah,
look, purely at SuperCoach, I feel like the AFL fantasy numbers really do speak for themselves about why you're considering him. But if you look at the guys that are averaged, and we will talk about fantasy in a sec, but you look at the guys that have a higher seasonal average than him last year, only 4 or 5 of them played every game. Guys like Fife, Kelly, Cripps and Dangerfield all missed at least 1 game. Some missed up to 8 games higher than him. Yeah. And yet his average is comparable to Dangerfield, Dunkley, Cripps and Kelly. He's within 3 or 4 points per game of them. So he certainly deserves some credit. He certainly deserves your consideration in that format, not just in AFL fantasy where we go, okay, week in, week out, this guy tons up. Week in, week out, he's not going to give me a bad score. And he goes 110 plus pretty much locked. Like his lowest average in the past 4 years, in AFL fantasy is a 108. So you know he's going to be around that elite mark of a top 5 to 10 midfielder this year.
Oh, absolutely. And even in SuperCoach, if you can build a solid argument that he's going to be up in that elite kind of level this year, you can make the same argument that he's not required if that's how you feel about it. If you think he's got a punchable face or you just don't like watching him or you go for Richmond or whatever else, you can look at him there and go, you know what, I'd rather start with Bontempelli or Oliver or Yo, who are all priced at about the same point that he is, within a 1 point on the season average. And you could make the same argument that any of those players could end up as a better choice than he is, if that's the way that you're so inclined. There's no... I really do feel like with Treloar in SuperCoach, there's no right or wrong answer in February. He's a perfectly valid option to choose if you want to, and not to give myself blisters from sitting on the fence, but is also equally as valid to pass on if that's how you feel as well. In DreamTeam and Fantasy, though, I think he really must be considered as one of your best options for your midfield starting point. Yeah,
he certainly does do that. We are at this point of the 50 most relevant. We're talking about who, at least I believe, look, it's my list. It's who I believe are among the top 10, 15 most relevant players in the competition. And so the reason you're choosing to not start these players is probably as much personal preference as anything else at this point in time.
It's a much more diplomatic way of putting it than I did, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you. It's because these guys are so good and so consistent and such good scorers that it's very much going, well, I just like this player more, or I think I might get a marginally better start by, maybe 20, 30 points, total over this here. So I'm going to choose this. Totally understandable. You do talk about his AFL Fantasy and DreamTeam being a really good, strong option. In AFL Fantasy, very different to the other formats, is you generally don't get a vice-captaincy opportunity week in, week out. You get the Thursday night games, and that is it. DreamTeam and SuperCoach, you get that vice-captaincy, free hit, so to speak, every single week. But what makes, Treloar an intriguing starting squad option, and yes, he's got Brodie Grundy that has this same opportunity. But if for whatever reason, and make no mistake, we can all we could figure out Grundy's going to be in the 50 most relevant. The question is where, not if. I would lose any credibility if I didn't have him. But
you'd think he's there.
Yeah, you'd think he's there inside the top 12. It is over the first 4 rounds in AFL Fantasy, Collingwood have 2 of the first 4 Thursday night games, meaning you can look at a vice-captaincy option from Collingwood. Now, you'll probably go Grundy, but if for whatever reason you're choosing to go more value in the ruck line, whether that's a good idea, we'll talk about later in the 50 most relevant, but he's got a pretty good couple of matchups to go against. It's round 2 against the Tigers and round 4 against Brisbane. As a reference point, last year, again, purely AFL Fantasy, last year against the Tigers, he went 152 and 130. You're going to take those numbers if you put the VC on him. And he went 120 against Brisbane. Again, you'll probably take that unless there's another player that's got a match up against Gold Coast that week. So, again, you might be choosing Grundy because he has good matchups there as well.
You might be, but Treloar is a very nice, unique vice-captaincy option too, if you want to bet against everyone else picking Grundy for that week as well.
Yeah, look, exactly right. So I think even though in AFL fan, he's going to sit you back around about 840k, and he's probably going to be one of your most expensive, if not your most expensive midfielder to start. He's worth paying that money for because he does not disappoint you. His price is not going to drop that drastically. And with AFL Fantasy, we have seen it can be quite difficult if you don't start these big premium midfielders because it's a weekly price change, not a 3-week price cycle change. Unless they get a big injury early on, they're not going to plummet their scores drastically. It's going to be hard to get McRae, Dunkley, Treloar, and get these big boys if you don't start with all of them, or at least 2 of the 3.
That's it. And so if you're not thinking that you'll be able to get them later, it makes perfect sense to start with him because he is the type of player that you're going to want to have in your team in that format at some point before the end of the year.
Yeah, look,
if you don't have him, you need a plan of how you're going to get him.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the case. And whether it be choosing to go against him or go against others, taggers can have an impact on him, but because he's not the elite ball user, guys like Sidebottom and still Pendlebury generally attract the tag. But in terms of who they play early on in the year, it's the Western Bulldogs, not renowned for a tagger. Similar with Richmond, not really renowned anymore for a tagger. It's more team pressure, not just one player. Hawthorn, similar, maybe Howe plays that role, but not often. Brisbane, Berry's been renowned to do it, but maybe he gets released. Port generally don't tag. Essendon, does Dylan Clark even fit into their strategy this year? I'm not so sure. Yeah, round 7. We've heard in the preseason Jack Steele will not be playing the negating midfielder role, according to Brett Ratton. So really you're going up until round 8 when Matt DeBoer and the GWS Giants come along. Again, it might not be him, but you're really looking over those first 7 weeks of relatively tag-free games should guys like Steele and Clark not need to play the roles they have historically.
That's it. So I think he's a safe bet.
Yeah.
I really can't think of too many reasons why he wouldn't be in your calculations beyond just a personal preference call.
Yeah, I think so. Look, I'm starting him in Dream Team and AFL Fantasy this year. Happy to let you know that right now. SuperCoach, he's on the upgrade target, no doubt. And maybe somebody else will emerge and trump him through the year, but I think to disregard him in SuperCoach or in any format could be a little bit dangerous for us in 2020. Let's get into your favourite part, though, of these podcast episodes, Jimmy, the draft.
All right.
Where is he going? What are you doing?
Okay. In a Dream Team Fantasy Ultimate Footy style type of draft, I think he does come into first-round calculations, just based on those averages from last year. However, I think when you also take into account that first round, you're going to have half a dozen players likely taken from outside of the midfield. Your Grundy, Gawn, if he looks like he'll be fit, Lloyd, Dustin, Whitfield, those sort of types are going to go. And then people are going to pick your McRae's. They're going to pick the Dunkley just from the hype around him. And then it becomes, much as Treloar is probably the highest averaged player left, or at least in that bracket with those that there or thereabouts with him, it'll come down largely to personal preference as to where he ends up going. So I think he's in calculations for the first round, but he's not a definite first round pick in most drafts. So you may be lucky enough to pick him up in the somewhere around the early to middle stages of a second.
Wow. That'd be amazing if you got that, wouldn't it?
If people choose to go otherwise,
Yeah.
Because it's not, again, if there's 5 or 6 mids taken in the first round, it's not unreasonable to suggest that could be Kelly, McRae, Dunkley, Gaff, and Merritt.
Yep. I want to be in that draft league, just quietly, but it's possible.
Oh, look, you would, and personally, I would probably take Treloar ahead of most of those as well. So I do think he is a first round calculation.
Yeah.
But he could very well be there on the turn. And if you're sitting there with the 10th or 12th pick, the last in your league, it's quite feasible you get 2 of those names as your first 2 players.
It is actually a good year, isn't it? While it means you probably miss out on the likes of Whitfield and Grundy and McRae, it is actually a good year to be right towards the end of that opening round, because you are going to get some guys fall to you that you might not have realised. And whether that be the Whitfield, for whatever reason, people go, no, I don't want the foot. Awesome. Brilliant. Maybe they don't join on the Lloyd. Brilliant. Or, as you've suggested, a guy who I've ranked inside the top 3 midfielders this year. You're getting him, the 9th or 10th selection overall, let alone drifting onto the turn. Man, that's a win in DT or fantasy.
Absolutely it is. But I think, in a lot of drafts, he will slide just that little bit, just for being a little more unfashionable than perhaps some others.
All right, SuperCoach draft. He's probably not going to go as high. Where does he go? Is he a late second, early third sort of selection?
Yeah, there or thereabouts for me, I think. Again, it's as much about personal preference, and he sits in that bracket. Same as we spoke about Fife in Dream Team the other day, where at his sort of level, there's a number of comparable mids that you could take in a Dream Team sort of format.
Sure.
Treloar, I think, kind of sits in a similar bracket in SuperCoach. In that there's a number of equally valid options that you could pick at or around his level. And so he doesn't scream, pick me straight off the bat. And so, late second, early third, I think is there or thereabouts where he goes.
So in that format, happy for him to be an M1, guaranteed you've used your opening 2 picks in other lines to get among,
That's
the top 2
and
or
it's
3.
quite feasible that as a Collingwood supporter in a SuperCoach draft, you could pick Grundy in the top of the first and then Treloar at the back of the second, and happy days.
And Crisp in the third, because they do.
Yeah, why not?
Fair enough. Awesome, man. Appreciate your thoughts today on Adam Treloar.
Easy done, mate. Thank you.
If you want to go and check out the rest of the article on Adam Treloar or any of the other players in the 50 most relevant, coachespanel.tv is where you can go and check all the other players revealed in the 50 most relevant, as well as a ton of other pre-season articles are there for you to go and check out. We get very close to the top 10. Very close to the top 10. Tomorrow, we hit the number 12.